Hello everybody, Dark Computer from Split Polygon here, and today we're going to continue our little discussion about environment creation with Arnold and Megascans. So I'm going to put up Bridge, and I've downloaded this beach sand material, which is 2 meters by 2 meters, and if you go to tiling, you can see it. You can tile it and make a larger surface from it, and it comes with a displacement map and all the other maps, which is very nice for us. So what we're gonna do is I picked 8K resolution on download, and I'm gonna pick 8K for sending to Maya. I already have the plugin loaded, so I'm gonna click export, and that should send this to Maya like that. And I'm gonna make a plane. I'm gonna make it very large and maybe give it 30-40 subdivisions to start with, and then we're gonna subdivide it with Arnold subdivision later on. And then before I do anything, I'm gonna go here and see what Quixel Bridge gave us. Now if you look at this here, it comes with roughness, albedo, and a normal map. But it actually comes with a lot more maps than it just showing you when you graph the shader. And that's because some of the maps don't connect directly to the shader, but they connect to the shading group. So if I select all of this and I click this little button here on the top, it's going to graph all the maps that came with this package. And you can see we have some floater maps that we can use as utility, and we also have this guy, which is a displacement map. Now I don't really like to connect displacement directly into the shading group, so I'm gonna disconnect that. I'm gonna click tab and type displacement shader, and that's gonna make this guy, and I don't need the shading group that comes associated with it, so I'm gonna disconnect it. Select the original shading group that came with the beach material and just middle click, drag and drop this one in the displacement slot, and that's gonna connect this. And then I'm gonna drag this is the EXR file, so I'm gonna make sure that alpha is luminance is checked, and you can see the map over here. So I'm gonna take the alpha and I'm gonna plug it into the displacement. Alrighty, and I'm gonna rearrange the shader a little bit. So here we have glossiness, AO, cavity, specular, bump, like a bunch of different maps that we're probably not gonna need for now, but they're good to kind of stick around in case we need it. And the great thing about this is the roughness map, for example, already comes with a range node pre-applied, which means that if I want to make some changes, make the sand more wet or more dry looking, I can just adjust these guys. So it's very conveniently set up for us. I'm going to select the geometry. I'm going to right click on the shader, assign material to viewport selection. And if I click 6 on the keyboard, here is my beach sand material. Alrighty. Now this is a very large plane and the texture is very large. So if you would have a human, the human would be like this big in this scene. And you can see the scale of this texture is like way too big. So to fix that, we have this conveniently placed 2D placement node. It's connected to all of these textures for us, so we don't have to type the same repeat values for all of these, which is a very good thing to do. So you can do like 10 by 10 repetitions maybe. Alright, so that scaled that texture right down. And let's just preview this. So I'm gonna make a cube to be my guide. So I'm gonna make it 180 centimeters tall and 60 by 60. So this is my scene is in centimeters. So this is actually the size of a human. So I think I've exaggerated this a little bit. So I need to scale this plane up. so that this repeat would make sense. Alrighty. And we're going to see if the tiling is correct or not once we start rendering this guy. So if I were to render this, I need to make a light. So I'm going to go Arnold, Lights, Sky Dome Light. And I'm going to scale that guy. Actually, let's keep it like this for now to position it correctly. Then we can scale it up so it doesn't bother us. So I'm going to load up a file. And there's my HDRI. And I picked a surprise texture HDRI with a beach on it because we're creating something like that. So I'm just gonna position this guy. At this moment we don't have anything in the scene, so it doesn't really matter, like we can just stumble around. But yeah, I'm gonna keep the cube in the scene for future reference, and I'm gonna just hide it. Alrighty, so selecting the plane, we have a light, and our renderer should be set to Arnold already, so that's all good. These are the default settings, which is fine for us. And let's boot up Arnold and downscale the render view, Arnold render view, and start the process. So this is going to take a little bit of time to convert all the textures to TX files because I did not convert it manually. So after that's done, it's going to start. Now these are 8K textures, so they're very large. And the displacement is an EXR file, which means it's even heavier in size. So depends on the machine and the RAM and that kind of stuff you have. This could take a minute, so don't worry if you see your computer freezes for a second. It's okay. Usually it's going to pop up this window, but sometimes it doesn't, or it gets hidden behind a different window. So if that happens, just don't kill Maya. Give it time and it will convert all the textures and it's gonna be responsive again. If you don't want to struggle with this or kind of wait for this to happen, you can pre-convert your textures yourself like we talked in the previous chapters, and that way you're just gonna click and it's gonna render. But for me, I didn't do that, so I'm gonna wait for a second, and it shouldn't take too long. And there we go. Now, first thing to notice is we have a render, but we don't see our plane anywhere. And we need to see why is that. So we start tumbling around and like, oh, there it is. So our displacement is crazy high. All right, so we need to do some adjustments over here. That's the first thing. Second thing I noticed is our plane is being destroyed by the size and the intensity of this displacement. Clearly we don't have enough polygons, first of all, and second of all, the intensity is just crazy high. All right, so let's fix that. Now, actually, before we do that, it would be great to kind of talk about. So Arnold can displace geometry without subdivision displacement applied to it, like a extra geometry, extra subdivision applied to it. And if you take this drop-down menu, if you switch to basic, you're basically going to see what is going on. So you're going to start seeing the actual geometry being displaced, or you can even go to wireframe and you can see these polygons being moved by the texture. They're being displaced, right? So I'm going to go back to shading now. And first thing, let's open up, we don't need the render settings, so we can open up Hypershade. Let's check this guy and let's check this guy and see what they're doing. So first thing is, this thing is supposed to be raw because it's an EXR file, and that is correct. The color space should be set to raw. That's the first thing to check. Then you can play with the scale, and also you can play with something called alpha gain and alpha offset. So these two parameters would control the kind of like the contrast balancing of your displacement. So if I take the alpha gain, if I drop it negative half of the alpha offset should be negative half of the alpha gain in order to get a correct displacement. So if I take this and take minus 0.5, that's going to bring our plane right down where it's supposed to be. So that's the first step. All right, I'm going to pause the render now. Second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the normal map. I'm going to set the strength to 0. I don't want to see any details for now. I just want to see how my displacement reacts. Now here's a couple things you need to look out. The displacement in Arnold, by default, already if you click this Arnold drop-down menu, it already has auto bump checked in, which means it's going to take the displacement and it's going to slot it into the bump slot, trying to give you more details than it actually has. So if I disable that, now you see the true diffuse and displacement. No normal map, no fake bump maps, no nothing, right? So I'm going to zoom right here. All right, so we clearly need more subdivisions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select my plane, open up the attribute editor and go to the shape node of the plane, and then open up the Arnold rollout. And if we go to subdivision, you're going to see type set to none. That means it's not being subdivided at all. We're going to switch that to Catmull Clark, and we're going to give it 4 subdivisions to start with. And then we can do another render. And now we see how intense our displacement is. Now when we have more polygons to displace, you actually see how crazy our displacement is, right? So there's a couple of ways you can control displacement in Arnold. You can do it on global scale, like on a shader level, or on an object level. So for example, if you have the same shader applied to 2 different planes, you can do it on an object level, and the way you do that is you select the plane, and in the shape node after subdivision you have a displacement settings, and you have height, and you have all these other parameters. Okay, so if I take this, if I drop this down to 0.1, it gets normalized, right? Now if I don't want to do this for every object and I have the same shader applied to many objects, I can actually bring this back to 1 and go to this shader node that displacement node that we made, and I have a scale which is pretty much doing the same thing. So if I do 0.1, we get the exact same effect. All right, so that's just 2 ways to think about how you're going to utilize your displacement. All right, so let's drop down to 0.01 maybe, and now it's starting to look more like sand. So if I zoom in, that's already starting to look pretty nice. Now you can clearly see some of the repeating happening. So there's a couple of things we can do to break that up. But already, all in all, this is not a bad start. Remember, we have no normal map, we have no bump map, so this is pure geometry and the diffuse map and the roughnesses map. All right, so let's do something really cool. So if I grab this and I enable the auto bump, and then I select the geometry, and into the displacement slot of the shape node, there's auto bump, enable that as well. Now let's render. Now you start to see a lot more detail, a lot more depth in these, and we don't even have a normal map applied. This essentially means that I can pretty much just delete these normal map nodes because I don't technically need them once I have this like detailed map. Now the normal map coming from this has extra information that is not in the displacement. That's why we're gonna use it. So I'm gonna select this and I'm gonna set this to 1. So you can see the normal map just adds extra tiny creases and little details that you don't necessarily see with the others. So if your auto bump and your normal map start to compete with each other, it's a good idea to disable one of them. So I'm going to disable the auto bump on this one, and disable it from here as well. And let's just see, with just a displacement and normal map, and that's starting to look a lot better. All right, so we can find some cool angle to play around with. Now if you zoom in right in like we are right now, you're going to start to see the polygons. So that means that the geometry we have is not enough for this kind of a close-up shot. So if you have this kind of a close-up shot, you can just bump up this iteration to like 6 or 7, and that's going to give you more polygons on displacement. Now here's an interesting, I'm going to actually just save the scene real quick. Here's an interesting thing. Our plane is completely flat, but if you render, you see that the silhouette of the geometry is not flat at all. So if you have something like an animal walking on this, or you have a car driving, then you're going to have some cut throughs because you're going to animate this based on your geometry over here, but then at render time that's going to shoot up and you're going to have some cut through issues. How would you get around with this? Well, Arnold has a very cool technique that allow you to convert your displacement to actual polygons. So I'm going to stop the render, select my plane. Now something to be mindful is the amount of subdivisions you have set here is the amount of times your mesh is going to get subdivided when you convert that. So just be careful to not to have like 6 or 8, because when you convert that's going to be like 25 million polygons and you might are going to crash. So maybe for preview purposes, if you want to export just to kind of see to have like a geometry to use for your animations, maybe you can drop this down to 3 and then you can go to Arnold, Utilities, Render, Bake Selected Geometry. So if I click this, it's going to ask where to save the OBJ, and I'm going to give it a path. And a name, and I'm going to call it plane displaced. Now I'm going to click save, and that's going to take a minute, so I'm going to pause the video, and then once it's done I'm going to go in that folder and I'm going to have an OBJ file. Oh, that actually exported very quickly. Never mind. It depends on the density you have set. This could take a minute, so I'm just going to go and import that real quick. So if I import now, what I get is my subdivision plane at render time being subdivided by Arnold. So if you have this, then you can actually, this one is not so high poly, so you can even go to like 4 or 5 to get even more fidelity. So if you are animating something like an animal walking on this, this would be a great idea on to do, so you can place your footsteps correctly and avoid cut through issues. And the good thing about it is this is going to take into consideration the height of your displacement. So if I render this guy right now, it's going to shoot up to here but no higher. So that means that if you adjust your height level of your displacement, you can just rebake new geometry and replace that, and you're going to see if you need to fix anything in your animation. All right, so I'm going to delete that. We don't need that for now. I'm going to bump this up to 6 subdivisions, and I'm going to start another render. And there we go. We have more details, and we can do some really cool shots like this. Now, in the next chapter, I'm going to take this step further, maybe just sculpt like a little hill, and we can add some other assets and make this into, a little bit of a more appealing scene than just a blank plane with a sand texture on it. So, yeah, Hope you guys stick around, and I'll see you in the next chapter.